Welcome. My name's Lori Hughes, and with me today we have the fabulous Molinda Zinda, and today's Fiduciary Forum is known as Non-IT Services. So last week we talked about non-IT goods. This forum will be on non-IT services. So I just want to make sure I covered all the administrative things that we were going to talk about. Let's see, welcome to y'all. Let you know that you're being recorded and that the videos will be available on YouTube. So if you have to leave for some reason or you can't make a future forum, you can always go out to YouTube and see that. Just as a reminder, this isn't a training class. It's really meant to be more interactive, to allow you to give yourself some time to ask questions using the room chat, and we'll be having some discussions there as well. Uh, Real quickly about the agenda. So today, our presenter will be Molinda Zinda, and she's going to be covering why does it matter? Well, if you were here last time, you know a little bit about that. And then just real quickly, an overview of the 4 classification types. And when I mean overview, I'm saying 5 seconds. And then we'll move on to non-IT services. We really want to make sure we leave some time this session for some great questions and answers, or, just to follow on and be able to do that. So without any further ado, unless I'm missing something, Joseph or Molinda, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the fabulous Molinda Zinda. Molinda.
Hello, 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 and good afternoon, fiduciaries. How are you on this Wednesday afternoon? Put your hands up if you're feeling fine. And don't put your hand up if you need more time. That's fine. So today we're going to talk about non-IT services. So how I want to use the next 24 minutes until we have to close out the webcast is I want to give you an opportunity to tell us about some, non-IT services that you're working on or have worked on, or some that threw you for a loop, some you thought were maybe a good, end up being a service, so on and so forth. So please use the chat feature and put in any type of examples or any scenarios that you wish to discuss in that area. So I want to make it really interactive this time around. Why does it matter? So when it comes to classification, it is priority. It's a must that you classify your purchase correctly. Now, if you are in the beginning stage, like right when you get a requisition, the requisition itself may or may not be classified. Maybe the requester is asking the buyer to classify it for them. They just know what they need, right? If you have a requesting staff, program staff that knows, then it'll probably be filled in. But even if it is filled in, even if they tell you, hey, this is a non-IT service, or this is a good, or this is IT, you still have to do your due diligence and verify that information by starting to conduct market research and finding out what are the normal industry standards out there for what it is that's needed. You also will have to determine whether how big the service component is to your contract. We tend to not tend to, but we do always rely on what's written in the state contracting manual. That's the primary purpose of your purchase, which drives your classification type. Raise your hand if you're familiar with what's called the 51% rule, where if the service costs more than the good, then it automatically turns into a service. We want to throw that thought process out the window. If you are, let's say last week we talked about non-IT goods. Let's say you had a goods purchase, but there was a service component. You have to look at how much the service component is. And if it's more than a certain amount of money, like $5,000, then you have to turn that into its own separate service contract. So when you're doing services, when you're doing goods, whether IT or not, you always have to pay attention to what is in that statement of work, what is actually needed, and how to separate it if you can. When it comes to non-IT services, the basic definition is someone doing something, right? So non-IT services is broken down into two separate categories. There's personal services and there's consulting services. That's another distinction that you're going to have to make, right? The reason it's so important is because there are certain statutory codes, there are certain policies that go with each individual classification type. Raise your hand if you already knew that. So if you're doing a goods purchase, you'll look to a public contract code. If you're doing a service purchase, you'll look to a different, maybe government code, IT, so on and so forth. You have to know which policy, which statute, which regulation, which state contracting manual to go to for any procedural information or guidelines. Also, you'll know within your agency where to look for those guidelines as well. Now, when it comes to personal services, there's some that automatically stick out right away. So you can go ahead and use the chat if there's some personal non-IT services that come to mind. I'm going to go ahead and read off just a couple as well, but feel free to type those into the chat if you know what a personal non-IT service is. So that could be landscaping, janitorial, garbage disposal, training services, absolutely, confidential shredding, right? Someone doing something. So those are the most common ones that come to mind. There's also consulting services. That's where it's someone doing something, but it's a product of their mind. It's a product of their study. So there could be something like demographic studies that come along with the report at the end of the contract. So there could be some study that that individual is putting together in their mind. There could be some scientific studies, right? Some laboratory studies that that person's expertise is the reason why they were evaluated and chosen for the contract for that non-IT consulting service. There are some other things out there like welding, security, inspection services, things like that. There's pavement repair. There's also instances where you may have like a part that needs to be repaired in a machine, a piece of machinery, but then also you need the maintenance service after it's been repaired. So there you're in a dilemma, right? That's a pickle. Say, okay, we need the part repaired because that's what makes the machine work. But we also need the service, the maintenance of it for upkeep for 6 months or a year, or however long you're going to make that contract for. So that's where you have to determine which one is it going to be. Also, like I said, it depends on the amount of the service. It could be on the same contract. So just be aware of that. I purposely am trying to keep out any services that could be confused with IT, but raise your hand if that happens a majority of the time with you, right? At your agency, whether it's you or someone you know, it's a service, but you have to determine whether it's IT. Now, IT means information technology. Is there some IT functionality to the service? That will change it from a non-IT service to an IT service. Okay, so it is information, data collection. It's going to be updated and housed, into your mainframes, to your servers, right? Things like that, to your circuits. So next time we meet for these fiduciary forums is going to be with Lori, and she's going to go over IT. Now in IT, that's going to be IT services and IT goods. We're putting it together. But just know there's a lot of times where services, that's really the fine line. And we've had some discussions with other units at DGS Procurement Division, and it seems to be with classification type, you're not taking the time, you meaning the agencies, the buyers, those out there that are classifying, not taking the time to actually research what it is that's needed to make sure the correct classification is being used before moving forward. Non-IT services can be confusing because they are separate when it comes to policy manual and separate when it comes to the dollar amounts that your agencies are allowed to spend on them, right? So for non-IT services, you look to SCM Volume 1, State Contracting Manual Volume 1. Raise your hand if you already knew that. SCM State Contracting Manual, Volume 1 is for non-IT services. SCM Volume 2, that we all are familiar with, is for goods, and 3 was for IT. But what we now need to get familiar with is the combination of 2 and 3, right? It's one manual that houses goods and IT, and one manual that houses services, which is still SCM Volume 1. Okay, so that hasn't changed for you for your service contract employees out there. Now you want to make sure that when it comes to the differences, knowing that there is an exemption level for services and purchasing authority that's granted a dollar amount for goods and IT. So that's what I'm saying. There's different roadmaps that you'll take when you classify your purchase correctly. Now, I haven't really looked at the chat because I was just talking. So I see that there's something written in chat. Lori, real quick, do you have anything in chat that stands out right away?
Not right away. There was one question. It's a little outside the scope, so I'll hold for that till later.
Okay.
And
Okay.
there's just some comments made to primary purpose, just kind of following along with what you said. And then I didn't get a chance to read the comment from Giovanna.
No worries. Go ahead and do that now because I kind of skimmed it. So give me a report on that. So basically what I want to touch on is when it comes to non-IT services, you also want to make sure that you're classifying correctly. So why it matters. Oh, my screen blacked out. I hope you can still hear me. Why it matters, because you cannot classify your purchase after you've made it. You cannot you cannot change the classification after you've made a purchase, after you've acquired the services. Okay? Classification must be done in the beginning before you move forward. Classification must be done even before you go and try to send your information to accounting to acquire monies, to encumber funds. You have to classify your purchase. So is there anything in chat right now or anyone that wants to share some examples of what they're going through or something that they bought recently that was a non-IT service? Because when it comes to the contracts that we have put together for non-IT services, you on your own time can go into Skippers, the state contracting procurement registration system, and you can look at active and expired contracts as well as awarded contracts to see the different types of contracts that are done throughout the state. We spend billions of dollars every year, and a high majority of those contracts are services. And a lot of those service contracts are done through leveraged procurement agreements. Raise your hand if you know what an LPA is, a leveraged procurement agreement. There are contracts in there that are through master service agreements, MSAs. There are CMAS, that's CMAS, that's California Multiple Award Schedule, right? There's also some software licensing programs, right? So that's more on the IT side, but there are a lot of IT and non-IT services that are readily available for us to use through those LPA contracts. But even though that contract may have it explicitly classified for you, you still have to know what you're looking for, right? You still have to go through looking at the requisition and what needs to be done in order to pair it with the right contract if there is one out there readily available. So when it comes to IT services, there are so many questions, and I'm surprised there's not more questions in the chat, but there usually are so many questions when it comes to IT. It typically is, who is there to help me when I need to classify, right? Say I'm kind of stuck in the middle of the road, I don't know, it could be this or that. Always go up your chain of command. Always, if you have to go to a manager, if you have to then go to maybe a supervisor or a manager, maybe a unit or section manager. You can also contact DGS. You can contact the Office of Legal Services. Now, the one thing before you jump to OLS is OLS at DGS will charge you, you know, if you happen to have spend a lot of their time up. Okay, so you want to make sure that you've went through the proper channels before you contact legal services for any help. They may or may not actually tell you how to classify it. They may direct you in some guidelines and to make your own decision for that, but that is your route. Always confer with the State Contracting Manual Volume 1 and your agency's policies. Now, a lot of times I get questions about non-IT services that are under $10,000. Now, we know that under $10,000 purchasing is what we call a fair and reasonable technique type of purchase. Raise your hand if you've heard of fair and reasonable, right? Because we have used the acronym F&R, but fair and reasonable is a technique. It's a way of making a purchase. So it's a purchase method for under $10,000. It's good for services. It's good for non-IT goods and also for IT. Now, the difference with non-IT services is that your agency, by virtue of SCM Volume 1, your agency is responsible for creating its own procurement process for non-IT services. So that's why some of you are at an agency that have a process for under $10,000 non-IT service contracts. We may not automatically jump to fair and reasonable, right? So in the purchasing realm, regardless of classification type, there are two words you need to be familiar with: informal and formal. Those have to do with the dollar amounts. So when it comes to non-IT services, anything over $10,000 is considered a formal purchase. Anything under $10,000 will be considered informal, and you have the ability to use the fair and reasonable purchasing method, right? But always look to your agency to see if there is already a process in place for those types of purchases specifically. Raise your hand if you're familiar with what I'm talking about. Right. I usually get a lot of questions about that. So it's almost 2:20. Is there any questions? I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna skim through the chat, so there may be a little dead air for 2 or 3 seconds here.
Well, Melinda, can I call your attention to a couple of things? One was
absolutely.
I don't know if this is right down the alley of what we're talking about here today, but Cindy indicated she got a notice from a vendor who's reporting on an IFB, and and not that they intend to bid. So, should she answer their questions, or what should it be? Do you want to talk about that right now, or should we save that for later aside?
I didn't quite follow along. Can you say it one more time?
Do you answer a question from a possible vendor who says they're reporting on an IFB, not necessarily committed to bidding to it, right? Or do you send it to the PRA officer as it falls outside the bidding process? See, again, that's not what we're talking about here. But
it's not. But an IFB that is active out there, it's an active solicitation for bid responses. If a supplier has a question about what is in the solicitation or about the project in general, you have to know what's in the solicitation yourself. Is there a Q&A time frame? So maybe for the next 2 weeks you're going to take questions and then take all the questions together, put all your questions together and answer them all at the same time and produce them to everyone who's interested in bidding who asked a question. Okay. So
great. That's great.
It's not a PRA because that's a public records request, right? That's after the fact.
Right. It's not subject to that.
And if you don't, have a Q&A, if you don't have a Q&A time frame in your solicitation, then answering the question would be inappropriate as well, because you're not offering that opportunity to everyone else that's written in the solicitation. So you can take the question and then you can say, I will gather questions and send and answer it and generate it to everyone, right? So you can actually put that into Cali Procure.
Okay. One more question here. Giovanna asks, right? What if it's a solicitation that is for it's a vehicle and standard maintenance, and then there's a part that needs to be replaced, right? I mean, it's a service, but then it appears like it's going to be turning into an expensive part purchase, right? We've talked about this separately, but right? I mean, it starts out as a service. Go ahead.
So basically what you're saying is the service contract is already set in place, right? It already was awarded. It's been going on for a while, or, you know, shortly. And now they've run across that, oh, a part needs to be fixed. Is that what you're saying? I'm
Correct.
assuming that's what it is.
She says correct.
Okay, so if that's the case, you want to look at how you set up your maintenance agreement. Was there any language in there for any parts, any optionals? If not, then you're going to have to do a separate purchase for that part as a good. If it is a good, you see what I'm saying? Because some car parts, you never know nowadays. But you'll do it as a goods purchase, and then you will add into the goods purchase the maintenance, which would be the installation of. So yeah, there's a way to do that. But the thing is when you go to buy the part, though, you don't automatically buy the part through the contractor that has the maintenance agreement. Because if you're going to do a goods purchase, if it ends up being that, then you're going to do that open competition. Because I could see somebody trying to say that's an NCB, right? Trying to say, oh, we can only get this part from this supplier because they already hold the maintenance agreement, and that's not grounds for an NCB. And an NCB is a non-competitively bid. You'll have to go out open competition for the part. Okay.
Joseph typing?
No, that won't be considered splitting orders, because your intent was not in the beginning to say we're going to purposely buy all parts separate and all maintenance separate, right? When it comes to order splitting, of course we don't want you to order split, but the big I, the capital I, your intent, right? Sometimes things happen, and if you have a justification for it, then so be it. But your intent is really what drives the splitting orders. Can you hear me? Raise your hand if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
We hear you.
Oh, okay, because I had a weird pop-up on my screen. Okay.
So the intent you can document, right? Document, and you know, as long as you haven't made a habit of slipping and sliding on your statement of works or your lists of goods, yeah, you're not going to have a problem. As long as your intent is clear, if you've defended yourself in a clear and straightforward way. Does that make sense?
You're not in any way changing the scope of your statement of work, right? The scope of your project. Yeah, you're not intently changing the whole flow of the project just for that one particular item. But do know that if it is, just to convolute, just to, you know, muddy the waters a little more, if that part is a specific brand that needs to be purchased, you're going to have to do an LTB justification for it, limited to brand. So that'll be an upcoming episode as well. We'll talk more about LTBs on a different webcast. But just know that you can look up LTBs, limited to brands, in the state contracting manuals. Okay, so subscriptions. Yeah, I got a couple of minutes, like 1 minute left. So Subscriptions are considered services. It doesn't matter honestly the way you get the subscription services. So when we think subscriptions right off the bat, we think of like magazines, catalogs, things like that, right? And typically the standard industry is you pay ahead of time for subscription. So if you wanted to buy a year of this particular magazine, then you would pay up front for the whole year, and then you start receiving the magazines. That's a subscription, that's a service, even though at the end of the day, you're holding a magazine, right? So raise your hand if you see where the confusion lies, right? I'm getting a magazine. I'm physically holding a magazine. That is a non-IT good to me because it's tangible. I can hold it. I can move it around. But in order to get that magazine, you have to have the subscription for it. So that's considered a service. Also, there are some subscriptions where you get the information via online, right? It could be something that you look up and that changes frequently. So that could be an online service. It's still a service, but whether it's IT or not is something you're going to have to sit down and go, okay, it's just because it is online doesn't automatically make it an IT service. It's still a subscription at the end of the day. So you definitely want to take a look at those particular instances and really justify your purchase. But subscriptions, yes, are non-IT services, just like training. Training also is non-IT service, even if you took training online. Okay, it's 2:28. Let me just go ahead and say, if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to email us at calpcahelp@dgs.ca.gov, and we'll be able to answer or direct you where to get an answer. Because a lot of times not a lot of times, I can't say that. All of the time, when it comes to classifying your purchase, you have to have an exact answer before moving forward. Okay. If you, like I said before, if you email us, that's one thing. You can still also work with your management, try to get a good understanding of what it is. Work with the requester because they're typically the end user. All right, over to the other team members. Thanks, everyone. Have a great Wednesday.
Thank everybody for attending. We really appreciate it. Now we have some future events that's going to be coming up, so you guys come out and attend that, or tell your friends, your co-workers, and we really appreciate you guys joining us today. Thank you, guys.